Good day, Broker Nation here. It's Lauren Hawkins once again with ThreePoint Capital. I have the pleasure of sitting down with the team at Lawrenson Walker for our third annual chat. Welcome, guys. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank
Good to see you.
Thanks you.
Happy New Year. Good to see you.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned a little prior to jumping on here, this has been a topic that has been brought up quite a few times from our partners, both of our company's partners, and wanted to know whether we were doing this again this year. And I said, you betcha. So everybody is looking forward to hearing about what's gone on in the last sort of 12 months with your company and what you guys have seen in our marketplaces, which are BC and Alberta. And so let's sort of get at her. So, I mean, how was last year? What's been the difference since, that second year end of pandemic and what's transpired since last spring?
Well, last year for us, and I think I can speak for the whole, our group, but also the appraisal industry as a whole. Last year was a year of extremes. So the first half of last year, things were gangbusters, as we all know, very, very busy. Couldn't get any busier.
Yeah.
Appraisers were run off their feet. You had deals coming out all over the place. But when the market changed in late spring, it changed very fast. And so everything started to drop. So record-breaking sales activity turned into record-breaking low sales activity almost overnight.
Yeah.
We've seen down markets in the past, but it turned so quickly that caught some of us off guard for sure. And it continues to be down now. Activity is off in most markets, certainly in BC by, call it 50%. So half as many sales are taking place now than last year. But again, what's interesting about this last year is that the first part of the year performed really well. Second half, not so much.
Right. Now, I mean, I know obviously going into 2022, we saw record prices and record gains and whatnot. And then, that kind of went into the beginning of 22. And then we started, like I said, seeing those losses. So we kind of gave back some of those gains. Now, would you say all of those gains were given back by the end of last year?
I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. If you sort of cut out the last 2 years, I think we'd probably be pretty flat.
Yeah.
So, a record-breaking increase followed by a record-breaking decrease, you're back to where we started. So,
yeah.
And we have done some appraisals property today that we also did 2 years ago. And the homeowner perhaps put some money into renovations, and it's still coming in a little bit more than it was back then with the renovations for sure, which was a surprise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good sign for obviously the homeowner and market, right? So
yeah.
Outside of the pandemic, what's the market been like going into this year? Like, has it just carried over from last year, or has there been anything different that you've noticed in the first 6 weeks of the year?
I can talk to this, Lee.
Yeah.
Just briefly. And I mean, I'll talk maybe specifically to Alberta for anybody listening in Alberta, because has been a bit of a different market that we've seen last year. We definitely followed the highs and then the lows, the same as BC did. However, the highs for Alberta in the last couple of years were new for us. It was the first time in 10 years that we had seen any increase. So everybody's watching to see if we have decreased to pre-pandemic values, but we haven't. We're definitely still ahead. Year over year, we're still up 7%. So that's a big win for Alberta. Yes, it's been a little up and down, but just to even be ahead year over year is a win for us. So that's been great. And then what we're seeing now in January is the lack of inventory in the mid markets, which in Alberta is like the 500,000, anything under. And especially now more than ever, that's where people are qualifying for to be able to get into the market. So we're seeing no inventory at that price range. So what that's doing is putting some pressure on what is out there. And we're starting to see some multiple offer situations. And, you know, if this continues, if there is no inventory to come onto the market, I mean, that only means an increasing market with the supply and the demand being off. So I think those are positives. You know, we are hopeful going into this new year that things aren't going to continue the way that they did in the end of last year.
I'll just add to that. We speak to a lot of realtors, obviously, and I know brokers do as well, but they're a good bellwether of what's actually happening in real time. And we ask them, you know, what was your open house like on Saturday? And they'll say, well, there was, you know, we had 100 groups through. I mean, that's a really good sign. But I think this early in the year, it seems like the buyers are out, but the sellers haven't got their homes ready to sell yet. So they're busy running around the Home Depot getting ready for things to hit the market. And I'll just go back to what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago. So prices, even though activity is down by 50%, prices year over year in the greater Vancouver area are down around 7%. So it's not a bad number when we take a look at what we're seeing in the news. Certainly the news would sort of lead you to believe it's a lot more than that.
Yeah. And Derek, what are you seeing up here? I mean, obviously we're in the same neck of the woods here. You know, for us, values, just depending on where the property is have been fairly stable, and some areas of the market's been down. So what have you seen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, every market up here is so different, like, you know, every product's different. It's tough to put an exact percentage, but we're pretty similar to the greater Vancouver area, where year over year, you know, we're down from the last 12 months around 7 to 8% mark. But that's, you know, that's just a very basic rough average. Once again, you know, anything around that million mark to 1-2, still selling quite decent. Actually, you go to the higher end market, less buyers, just less demand. Obviously, those price drops have been more dramatic than the lower end values for sure. And I mean, the good areas with the great schools, there's still lots of demand to those areas. Big difference up here with schools, just like Vancouver, probably Alberta as well. But people are watching, and anything that's on the market, that's been on the market for, you know, 3+ months, there's usually something kind of wrong with that property. It's overlisted, or it's just not in the right area, or it's just not something that the general market is looking at to buy. But if there's something in the right area, priced right, it's gone pretty quick. You know, we just completed appraisal, and it actually sold above asking price. There was multiple bids on it.
Wow.
It was, you know, it was in the lower Mission. It was priced right. It was a nice place, and you can just show that the demand is still there, and inventory is still tight up here too, which you probably are aware of.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, you know, things are picking up for sure. There's more positivity in the market, and maybe these rates hold off for a little bit increasing, and maybe the public's looking to get back in here.
That's some good news all around. I mean, I know just Chantel and I had spoken earlier in the fall about, you know, prices and activity. Had seen some reports and whatnot, and it's just great to hear, you know, some great news coming out of Alberta after, you know, the stories that we've seen over the last 3-4 years on what's going on. So it's some great news to hear about, you know, that sister province there. So what's sort of been the sort of breakdown of activity within the regions between single family homes, condos, townhouse type of stuff? What have you sort of seen the most activity in?
I think up here, at least in the, you know, it's been a mixture of single family apartments. There's just not a lot of townhomes up here, to be honest. They've built quite a few in the Kelowna north-south area, in that infill zoning area. There's a few listed out there right now, but there's still just not a lot of townhomes. So it's probably on the lower end of the range for the amount of volume we do for property types, at least. But single family condos take up the majority of the business, obviously. Not a lot of acreages that come up for sale either. So definitely single family and condos are the busiest market.
I'm actually surprised that, you know, some of the new development aren't the townhouse. That's I think the most appealing product in my mind for people, whether you're downsizing, want something a little bit smaller. It's easy for, you know, typically a younger family to kind of get into, or those that are, you know, snowbirds, like you can lock the door, leave, and you know you've got neighbors around, and you know somebody's taking care of, you know, the snow removal, et cetera, et cetera. I'm surprised that we don't see more of those type of projects around. I think it's
Definitely.
it's bang for your buck.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they
Same
have
with
lower
the
strata fees too. So go ahead, Lee.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same with the Greater Vancouver area, Lower Mainland. The townhome properties are anything that sort of falls in that affordable category is performing really well, but affordable means different things to different people. But certainly the
Absolutely.
townhome product, pretty much across the board, is very desirable for sure.
Yeah.
That is now that's everyone dreamed to own a home at one point with a white picket fence. Now their aspirations are to own a townhome, and so that's why those properties are hot.
Yeah. What's Alberta looking like, Chantel, right now in sort of the bigger markets?
Yeah, kind of the same thing too. And again, it's just the affordable product and new buyers looking to get into a townhouse as well. But with the limited inventory, as I said, that is becoming difficult. Another interesting thing is their reason or a perspective of why there's limited inventory is that people just can't afford to move now or justify moving now. So they're staying put. They're not putting their house on the market because they don't have anywhere to go, which is just continuing the inventory problem. Even our rental product right now is very limited. So, you know, a lot of people getting divorced, I think, are just ending up staying in the same house because they can't even go find a rental property within their budget. So definitely that market right now is, I mean, I guess you would say performing well, but we do need inventory for it to continue. Calgary, anything over $1 million, you know, it's definitely a different market, definitely having a tougher time moving that inventory, and we are seeing a bit of a decrease in that product.
Yeah,
it's kind of a bit of a log jam in the sense. I mean, if you think back to when the market was moving up really fast, sellers were reluctant to sell because they were concerned that they might not be able to buy something, and so they were sitting on the sidelines, and it was a bit of a log jam to see who was going to go first. Kind of like the same thing today, but not under the same positive circumstances. You just have people that, you know, they want to sell, they want to buy something, but there's just not much. They don't know if they can, first of all, because of interest rates, perhaps.
right.
But yeah, a lot of people are just sort of sitting there waiting to go. So I don't know what it's going to take to sort of break the logjam, but as long as there's a logjam there, the prices are going to get pushed up a little bit.
Yeah.
And as soon as the activity starts to take place, we'll sort of get back to a more balanced spring market.
Well, yeah, with rates the way they are and the way they've been going, and especially, you know, the last increase that we just had, it's definitely putting pressure on all aspects. But at the same time, you know, borrowers are now really looking at, like we've just said, about, you know, not being able to find a place, or more importantly now, does it really make sense? Does it make sense to pay the high rate, especially if they're having to look at our segment of the market and that in the mixed space? You know, does it make sense at the rates that are out there, right? So that's going into the factor of whether or not should we list, should we buy, should we just stay put and maybe look at renovating, bringing in somebody to give us a valuation on, you know, what the place looks like now versus what it would look like if we put some renovations into it. So definitely a big piece of that puzzle. One of the other things that we've seen a lot of lately have been pre-sale condos now coming to the completion point in BC. We've been seeing this quite a bit in Ontario, in our Ontario business, but now I've noticed a lot of that is now focused over to more or less the Lower Mainland, a little bit in the Alberta market, but more so. So sort of give us a little breakdown of what's been going on in that segment of the market, because it's a hot topic.
Yeah, that is a very, very concerning market, or sorry, a concerning segment of the market.
Yeah.
I think if you have a condo or a townhome that is completing now and the contract was written 6, 12, 18 months ago, 24 months ago in some cases,
Yeah.
I would be really concerned about what its value is today. We're seeing, I use this statistic just anecdotally, of the pre-sale completions appraisals that we're doing today, approximately 50% of them are coming in below purchase price or below the
Wow.
historic contract price.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes they're, and the margins are fairly significant in a lot of cases. So it's not uncommon to see, a shortfall of, $200,000 on a $1.5 million pre-sale. It's bad news. It's bad news all around, but we've been through this before. I think back in 2011, it was the same thing. But I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of them in the coming months for sure.
Are there quite a few projects all completing at the same time right now down there? I mean, obviously there's quite a few cranes in the sky still down there, but it seems like we're seeing one development after another.
They seem to be completing. Yeah. Yeah. So the good thing about that is we talked about supply and inventory. If those things do go on the market again afterwards, that'll help the supply and inventory issue.
Yeah.
However, they've got to complete the initial transaction. So that's where the real big problem is.
Yeah.
It's going to be a bigger problem going forward for sure as we get into this, between now and summer. A lot are finishing.
Now, are we seeing that same price difference among all the regions of Lower Mainland, or is it just one specific, Vancouver, Fraser Valley, or whatnot?
Not even regions. It's project to project. So it's how certain projects were sold. I mean, you could have a project that is completely fine on one side of the street and another project that's completing that they're all upside down.
Right.
Really depends on how they were sold in the beginning and how they were marketed, things like that.
Right.
But building by building, and typically when you have one unit that's coming under value or under contract price, the rest of them in the building are likely going to be have the same fate.
Right. And Chantal, what's the pre-sale market like in Calgary, Edmonton area? Stuff that we've seen in the doors has been more of the townhouse type of stuff, not necessarily the condo market. Can you give us a little indication of what that's looking like right now?
Any of the problem files I've seen have been the condos, and it seems like it would be just over a year ago that, specific developers were selling to an Ontario buyer.
Right.
And so for them, the price seemed pretty reasonable, what they were going to get price per square foot.
Yeah.
However, it doesn't seem like they did the due diligence in what is that Calgary's market price. So we're seeing a big discrepancy from now. I mean, the market has gone slightly down, but it definitely came down to the developer overpriced the product when they sold it. So we're seeing a little bit of that and trying to figure out how to deal with those and, make sure that everything is upfront to the developer, really, because they're the ones that put everybody in this situation. So in terms of townhouses, again, because of the limited inventory and, we've seen an increasing market only in that sector. So those are coming in at purchase. We saw a really big influx a year ago for new builds of single family dwellings. People, I think we talked about this on the last call, as I remember, were like lining up to get a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
And being one of those few that they were only selling so many per month. So everybody wanted in. Well, the builders obviously were increasing their prices because they could just as fast as they were selling them.
Yeah.
So that market fluctuated like crazy over just a couple months. Now those are coming to completion and the market is softened. And we do predict that we are going to have some issue coming up with the appraised value of those purchase prices in that market.
Yeah.
Chantal, can I give you the example of the project that I think I'm talking about, the rental?
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
So essentially, there's developers are getting very creative because they know they have a building that's coming to completion. They also may not have sold out their whole inventory, so now they're competing against themselves, so to speak.
Yeah.
So developers get crafty with respect to those situations, and so they'll do things like, we've heard of decorating allowances. You hear of various cash backs and incentives, buyer incentives. But we did come across one in Calgary that is very, very unusual. So it was within the contract, there was a notation to refer to an addendum, and the addendum was an 11-page addendum. And if you could figure out how to read through it, and I think we read it 3 times and we still didn't quite understand what was going on there, but what it was an addendum to have a rent back. So the developer guaranteed a rent back of, I think it was 3,000 a month or something.
Yeah.
3,000 a month for 36 months. And if you didn't want to rent it, somewhere buried in that 11-page addendum, if you didn't want to rent it, they'll still give you that money every month. And so that was a huge buyer incentive. So that needs to come right off the purchase price.
Yeah, 70,000 cash back in 2 years. So you wouldn't want to be loaning on that money they're going to receive back.
No, that kind of reminds me of some of the stuff that was going on here years back. Just in sort of the Glenmore area, there was a townhouse development and they were given cars as the incentive, right? You had a choice of a smart car or a Urus or something of that nature. And, you know, caught a lot of people off guard because, you know, they bought this house for 250,000. Oh, Gress, I've got a car with it. Well, guess what? That car's worth 50 grand. Now our lending value's 200, and it puts some people in situations where like, I don't have that extra money, but I can't get it out of the contract because they don't want to amend it. And all of a sudden it just had just a adverse effect on those developments. Right. So that's a new one. That's something else. I mean,
that's definitely a new one.
But sometimes they're not as sneaky as that. They like what we're seeing in the single family is that builders now are offering the same product, the same lot next door to what they were selling a year ago. But now they're offering free basement development, which is worth, you know, minimum 50,000.
Yeah.
So how do you justify that? Is that now just, if I don't want my basement development, are you going to give me 50,000 off the purchase price? So we really need to go back to the builder and developer and figure out what is that worth
look like,
and should we be removing that from the purchase price? And how do we make the adjustments on the comparables that they paid 50,000 more a year before that?
Exactly. And I mean, and it doesn't matter what lender you're dealing with, every lender is going to view that a little differently, right? And you know, definitely if it's a high ratio kind of mortgage, well, you're going to have to either amend the contract to reduce the price, or clients are going to be stuck with that difference between the contract and what they can get financing on. So, and
we've learned they do not amend the price. That's a non-option.
Yeah.
So unfortunately it's the latter. Yeah. They have to come up with that additional fund.
There was a project that almost exactly what Loren is saying in Richmond a few years ago. Townhomes were being sold for 500,000 and it came with a Mercedes in the driveway. And if you read the contract, if you didn't want the Mercedes, on the statement of adjustments in the lawyer's office, they would take off $50,000. So effectively, the purchase price of that townhome is $450,000. But if you were to go on MLS shows the sale at 500,000.
Yeah.
So all the appraisers and everyone who were using these comparables from that project, and the whole marketplace was kind of affected by it because it was this artificially inflated sale that's put on MLS when it's actually 50 grand less.
Right.
So we have to be careful for sure.
And can those be adjusted after the fact? Like, I mean, obviously now that's an adjustment, or technically, legally, that's the sale value of 500, and that adjustment after the fact really doesn't come into play. Because I mean, those are all overvalued properties.
The multiple listing service doesn't necessarily pick up on that. I think when you look at title registration, it'll probably show the correct net price.
Right.
But from an MLS perspective, it's left to the realtor to decide whether they want to amend the sale price on the listing. Okay. And that's something I brought up with the real estate boards to try to make sure that those numbers are accurate. And so far, they haven't been able to guarantee us that those numbers are absolutely 100% correct on the sale prices.
All right. Well, that kind of leads me into sort of next kind of conversation I wanted to have is what goes into preparing a report. I mean, everybody knows that, they submit a request for a report. Like, what's the process within Lawrenson Walker? Like, how does that go from being received to the broker or lender receiving the report back? Obviously, it's just not, a 5-minute process. Like, what kind of goes into that?
Yeah. So do you guys want me to touch on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially the order will come in either through appraisal management company, or you pick up the phone and you call the appraisal firm, or you email them, or you go through, maybe they have a proprietary order form like we do. The order gets received, and then the administrative staff look at the order, they take a look at the property, they quote a fee,
Right.
and then the fee is collected. Once the fee is collected, then the order gets assigned to an appraiser. So the appraiser gets the order, then they phone. Typically, once the appraiser gets it, within a couple of hours, they will call to book an appointment. And they'll usually book the appointment for, could be the same day, could be a day later, but the appraisers are trying to get in there as fast as possible, really trying to work with the occupant's schedule. And then from there, once the appraiser has finished that, they probably are seeing 3, 4, or 5 properties that day. Once they get back to once they're at the property, they spend anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Some properties are easier than others, but the more complex properties certainly could take up to an hour. And they're gathering information. They're gathering physical information about the property as if you were a typical buyer. What would a buyer be looking for? Are they, they're looking at the condition, they're looking at the layout, they're listening to see if there's a train track next to the home, things like that. That's what we're doing when we're there, gathering the information. So we then go back to our respective offices, and then we write the report, which is an analysis and a report. So you're really doing 2 parts to it.
Mhm.
Writing the report is one, but really analyzing the data that you've collected. How does that fit into the marketplace in terms of recent sales, as well as competition? What else is on the market that's similar to the subject? What you're competing with? That process takes easily between 1 to 3 hours. And then from there, at least with Lawrenson Walker, we submit it to another appraiser who reviews it from start to finish. Second set of eyes is always a good thing.
Yeah.
And so from there, the administrative staff then email the report back to whoever ordered it. So that process can be 12 hours in some cases, or it could be 36 hours in some cases.
Right. So what service providers do you use? Obviously MLS, when you're collecting, obviously BC assessment or assessment agencies in each of the areas. Are there any other facets that go into valuation, like when you're looking at it?
So I think, it depends on where you are. If you're in an urban area, urban or suburban, MLS is really going to be where the best data is. That's just your one-stop shop. When you start to move away into some acreages in rural areas, then you have to start going with BC assessment, land core, because some of these transactions that take place aren't on MLS.
Right.
And so you have to dig to get this stuff. So much easier source of data in the urban and suburban areas, much more difficult once you start to leave those areas. What about the Okanagan, Derek? Is that the same?
Yeah, I would say so. All of our information is highly reliable on the MLS information available to us, BC assessment. And it's always good to maybe contact the listing agent on some of the listings if the information is not clear, just to confirm, because sometimes the realtors are inserting incorrect information on MLS. So it's always good if something is standing out. It's always good to double check and just make a quick phone call if something's just not adding up. MLS is usually the go-to for us.
And there's lots of different layers of the MLS too. So there's analytics within the marketplace. We like to use the home price index to determine sort of what the market's doing in certain sub areas. But the HPI, we call it, doesn't work in some markets. So I don't think that they use the HPI in Alberta, but certainly in the greater Vancouver area, HPI is our go-to for, specific market evidence.
I think that's, some great insight into the whole process, because, obviously in busy times, our partners out there, might not understand what goes into providing that valuation and that report to a lender or to themselves or even to a borrower. So knowing that it's just not a cookie cutter process, because every file for the most part is unique. Every property is unique and may have other, stipulations to providing a valuation. So I think that's a good piece of information for our partners out there. What sort of big misconception by brokers and borrowers that you guys would like to kind of bring to light? Something that kind of comes up all the time that you don't have a chance to talk about.
I think I'll start with this one quickly here. I think right now with the current BC assessment values is a big misconception right now for a lot of people. Typically, over the last few years, property values seem to be quite a bit higher, if not slightly higher, at least higher than the BC assessment. This is the first year where I'm noticing, I think Lee and Chantel as well are noticing that these new assessed values are everything. I'd say 95% of properties, the final value is coming in lower than the BC assessment value. Keep in mind that those assessments were completed based on the date of July, midsummer. Yeah. The market has considerably dropped since the last 6 months here in the Okanagan, and I'm sure in Vancouver as well. So it's difficult if a broker is unsure on the value. They might just look at the BC assessment and say, okay, this is a good gauge of where we're probably going to come in at with this new assessment.
Right. Yeah.
Because they look quite nice right now. They're quite high.
Well, I was saying before we came on here, I mean, I know our property, it was up quite substantial. And my wife and I were looking at each other going, wow, like I have a hard time saying that we would come in close to that on the appraised value, right?
Yeah, so that is right now a big misconception right now with these new values where, like I just said, 95% of the time we're coming in below that new assessed value. So it's good to educate everyone on these assessed values where, they don't really know what's going on if that property has had a renovation or not, but that's why it's always good to have an appraiser touring the home and walking the property to get an exact accurate value of each property.
Well, that's it. And for those borrowers out there that they've seen their assessment rise rapidly, don't know when the valuation's been conceived, like you said, right in a high point. Yeah, I mean, everybody's valuation is going to be great. And for those that don't agree with that value, hiring a company like Lawrenson Walker to come in and give a valuation, so then you could go back to the assessment authority and say, listen, I appreciate, the nod of our property's gone up in value, but, given what today's value is, I'd like to sort of challenge it. And here's a report of why, and an evaluation that's more suitable, that we can kind of come to an agreement on a new valuation for tax assessment.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys do a bit of? Is there a segment of your company that looks after that type of reporting?
Assessment appeals, I mean, that's something that we used to try to market, but to be honest, not very many people hire a professional appraiser to appeal their tax assessment. Just doesn't happen very often with residential properties.
Yeah.
The assessment authority makes it really easy to be able to appeal your assessment.
Okay.
And sometimes people just don't want to hire an appraiser.
Got it.
But certainly it's out there, just not as much as I would have thought.
Okay. So anything new with the company for last 12 months or going into this year? Anything new information you'd like you guys to share? New growth?
I just want to kind of go backwards, just because I wanted to say one thing about educating brokers, because I get a lot of questions about the ordering platforms that are available for them. So I just want to clear up that there is a misconception that we call them appraisal management companies. And these would be companies as Solidify, NAS, RPS, FNF, that a broker has the option to go through that portal that they all have. So just want to make it clear, those aren't our competition. They're not appraiser providers. They just facilitate the appraisal from the appraiser to the lender in the situations where the lender wants more of a blind ordering system. And by blind, what I mean is the lenders that require that they want the appraiser to be anonymous to the one that's ordering. So how that affects us too is just so that brokers are aware that when you place that order, we don't have the option to just go into one of these platforms and grab that order. It is just randomly assigned based on certain criteria, mostly fee, who's going to do it the cheapest. And so, yeah, I think sometimes we get questions of, can you go grab that order? I just placed it in Solidify.
Right.
If it's a lender that doesn't let you select Lawrenson Walker as the preferred appraiser, then the answer is no, we cannot get access to that file. It is going to just be randomly assigned. But then the lenders that do allow brokers to be able to select their preferred appraiser don't necessarily need to use those platforms. You can go directly to that appraisal firm and place that order. So it is very important to understand which lenders allow you to select your appraiser firm, because then you do get all the benefits of having that relationship, being able to talk about the value potentially ahead of time, make sure this is something that is going to follow through, and even just have the conversation about fee or complexities of the property, or, you know, we aren't able to reach the value, here is why. Just this value added service that we hope to be able to provide to brokers when you come direct to us.
Those are great points, because, you know, my previous life, you know, we had used the service, and we gave the brokers the opportunity to just go in and select their appraiser partner that they wish. I mean, there are so many variables when it comes to those services out there on what lenders will allow, how and why they use those services. So yeah, it's definitely been a hot topic over the years on why and how they work. And like you said, it was a great example of how appraiser firms are working with those companies and not against them. Like they're a partner, right? They're an aggregate, right? So
I'll add to that, Lauren, with respect to what Chantel was saying, fees. So the fees that the appraisers charge, the question gets asked quite a bit from brokers, why are there so many fee increases? And I think the appraisal management companies haven't really figured out a way to do predictable fees. They always start low and then sort of chip away. We recognize, I think we mentioned this last meeting as well, that process is clunky from the AMC point of view, and it definitely could be smoothed out for sure. But something interesting for a broker to know is that what you're charged, what you see on the invoice that you pay for the service when you're using an appraisal management company, is not what we see on our end.
right.
So we don't know what the broker's paying. We know what we charge the appraisal management company. Then the appraisal management company does their markup, whatever that may be, and then they bill that to you. So sometimes the fee increase may or may not be triggered by the appraiser when the appraisal management company is in the mix.
Well, and I think one piece of that too is that software that's being used to make that order, and then all of a sudden, you know, they've got the pricing there. Dealing directly with a firm like yours, you guys know the markets that you're in. You know, okay, well, that address is going to cost an extra bit in kilometers. So when you quote it, you're quoting exactly what that's going to be to your firm,
Absolutely,
to the end result, right? So when you're using that automated service, it doesn't know those little intricate pieces of that request. So they're just quoting based on what's the cheapest, and not necessarily what is or who is closest to that property that may be a little bit more. That low price is always going to be $50, $100, $200 more, because once an office gets that report and like, well, no, I mean, here are the factors of why we've got to put that increase in, and therefore, you know, brokers seeing those increase requests, right? So
the cheapest option isn't the best option, and we often say that's similar with haircuts, childcare, and laser eye surgery. So I think if the appraisal falls into that category as well. Cheapest is not the best option.
Yeah, exactly. Know what you're paying for. That's for sure. So let's circle back to anything new coming down the pipeline for you guys.
I think we're gearing up for the upcoming CMBA conference. We had so much fun. Conference. I don't know if many of your brokers remember that we had a party up in the Sky Suite. And so we are debating, scratching our heads, mulling it over as to whether or not we're going to do something like that again. But, you know, aside from that, we're just, trying to truck along, refine our systems, make our processes as efficient as possible while things are slow, and that when things pick up again, we'll be ready to go.
Yeah, taking some time to take a deep breath and, like you said, regather yourself and kind of look at and assess some stuff. I mean, this year, I've made comment to some colleagues and other individuals out there that I think now this whole pandemic ideas behind us all, and I found this year is going to be a really busy year for the industry as far as events and activities go. I mean, if you look at my calendar now, it seems like I'm here for another couple of weeks, and then the dog and pony show starts. I mean, it's like I'm pretty well 2 weeks home, 2 weeks gone, 2 weeks home for pretty well the whole remainder of the year. So I think everybody's taking that deep breath going, all right,
here we go.
Got through this. Here we go. Let's get back to work and let's get back at her. And last fall we had the first big event. MPC was in Vancouver. You could see that excitement. I mean, I remember when the doors opened for the trade show, I was talking to someone at the booth, and Brad was talking to someone there, and we looked up, and that floor was absolutely jam-packed. And it's like,
yeah,
wow, like we're back at her. Like let's go. And I think this year is gonna have that intense, that energy, that sort of excitement back. And I know it's gonna be a very busy and tiring year, but at the same time, I'm really looking forward to connecting with a lot more of our partners, meeting some new individuals and whatnot. And like I said, CMBA is gonna have their event in May, and I think we're all looking forward to that industry event as well. It's been a few years since CMBA BC have had that. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to what lies ahead for this year for sure. What one thing we can end on that's been exciting in your personal lives over the last 12 months? And I'll start.
Yeah.
We've like I said before when we came on, we've spent a lot more time in Texas, which with family, getting to know some new family members for us. So that's been a really exciting part to meet people that you've never spent much time with, and getting to know those individuals and a new way of, I don't want to say a new way of life, but and whatnot. So that's been really exciting for my wife and I, and we look forward to seeing how those relationships grow over the next few years.
Very cool. Congrats.
Thank you.
I'll go, I guess. So for me, about a year ago, I got in line, or less than a year ago, I got in line with everybody else in Alberta and decided I wanted a new house on a new lot. So I'm going through the process of building a new house. Just 5 minutes down the road, but on the same street as where my sister purchased a house too. So we're going to be neighbors, and I'm really excited about that.
Oh, nice. Nice. Now you get to go through all the struggles that everybody else has gone through over the last few years.
I need that appraisal to come in. You think I'd have better insight than I did.
Not as crazy. Wait a second. How many times I tell people, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, when it comes to you and emotions and family down the street, you just
absolutely. I think
it's decisions you didn't think you would.
Yeah, I think it's a good process, I think, for anybody to kind of go through once in their life if they're able to.
I guess I'll go. Earlier this year, our family took a ski trip up to Big White. Conditions were great. It was a little foggy, but the sun came out, and ended up getting my daughter on skis, and we put her in ski school, and she was able to ski by the end of the day. So my wife and I were able to take my daughter down the mountain, and she was all on her alone by herself going down the hill, no problem. So it was a pretty proud dad moment right there. So
oh yeah,
we'll be doing that again for sure.
Yeah, those are great moments. I remember when I took my kids up for the first time, my daughter absolutely fell in love with skiing. That was something that her and I did for many years, and something my son just had no interest in after that one day. So yeah, it's definitely fun to watch them and the smile on their face.
Yeah, it was a great time.
Yeah.
So I've had this bucket list item for probably the last 20, 25 years, to take my kids to Disneyland and during Christmas. And so I don't have 20, 25-year-old kids. My kids are 7 and 5. So I was able to take them to Disneyland during Christmas this year. And it was definitely a bucket list thing. It was awesome. And so happy we did it.
Had you been before, Lee? Or had you been?
I've been, just not with
Yeah.
my kids. No, it was our first time. And being there around Christmas time, you can imagine all the lights and all the
Oh,
magic
yeah.
that was going on. It was definitely the right time to go.
Yeah, it's the perfect age to take them as well. You know,
Yeah.
they're big enough to get on all the rides and still young enough to, you know, really see the magic and what Disney is to a lot of people. Yeah, it's a fun.
I'm ready to go back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think this wraps up yet another great conversation, and I truly appreciate your time and obviously our longstanding partnership with your firm. Definitely near and dear to our hearts and whatnot. And wish you guys continued success this year, and look forward to seeing you in these industry events over the next few months.
Yes, can't wait. Thanks for
Thanks for
having
inviting us, Lauren.
You're most welcome, guys. Take it easy, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you.
Okay.